Have you heard about Anchor? It's the easiest way to make a podcast, and it's the way I'm making my podcast right now. And it's free. They have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. And Anchor is going to distribute your podcast to all the major important places you would ever want, like Spotify and Apple and so many more places. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. I love it. It's so simple. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hi, I'm Lindsay, and welcome to the Intuitive Psychologist podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I've been in the mental health field for over 15 years. During my spiritual awakening, I've realized that psychology is really missing the mark. I believe that traditional therapy combined with spirituality can actually lead to long-term healing and growth. And I've actually had the luxury of seeing this happen within my own private practice, where I've tried to incorporate the two together. My intention for this podcast is to discuss my opinions about spirituality and therapy, and I like to do it in a fun way. My hope is that I'll inspire other people to explore different ways to improve their lives. But I'd also like to normalize what many people have been going through or are currently going through, so that you can know that you're not alone and that you're not crazy. And maybe along the way I can inspire a few therapists along the way to actually think outside the box and to offer their own version of intuitive healing. If this is interesting to you, then join me on this journey as we try to have fun and explore an informal way to bridge the gap between psychology and spirituality. Welcome, friends, to my very first episode of my very first podcast ever. Little heads up, obviously I just said that I've never done this before, and I'm a huge lover of podcasts. In fact, that has been one of my biggest coping skills that I've had probably in the last 3 or 4 years. And so what I thought I would do for my first couple of episodes is tell you who I am as it relates to being a clinical psychologist, and sort of what's my background, to hopefully lend a little bit of credibility to why I have the opinions that I have, and why I think that psychology could really use a boost in the way that we look at things. But wanted to just give a few disclaimers up front. One big disclaimer is a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is mostly my opinion, right? So I am not on this podcast as formal education or training for people who are looking to get traditional education about psychology or therapy or mental health. I obviously do have a background in that, but I'm also pulling a lot from my personal journey, my own experience along the way, and so I just want to make it clear that I am not coming on here to tell you all like exactly what psychology is as it's taught in books or the research, because it is a huge piece of psychology and therapy, is that everything is research-based and that we don't really talk outside of what our expertise is. So my expertise is in clinical psychology, but what this podcast is about is my personal opinions about how to incorporate spirituality with psychology. Another disclaimer that I want to put out there is that I do not want to edit this podcast very much for 2 reasons. One, let's be real, I'm a little lazy. I think that it could be very daunting to sit here and to edit everything that I say or how I say it. I am a massive perfectionist, so I think that that could actually end up just hindering me from even getting anything out. 2, when trying to look at how to do a podcast formally, I became very sort of frozen in fear as to all the different apps that I needed and all the different equipment that I needed and all the different ways to sort of get this thing done. And I realized I'll probably figure it out along the way. This is going to be kind of crappy at first. And so I appreciate anyone that bears through the first episode and can bear through however this sort of, the genesis of this podcast over time. So that's my second reason why I am probably not going to be editing this anytime soon. And the and the third and final reason I cannot remember anymore because my dog started to play and I got too paranoid that my one dog, actually both dogs, are going to start barking in the background, and that will be loud as hell. So maybe my third point was going to be that it just is more authentic for y'all to see that I'm not trying to come on this podcast to pretend that I know more than everybody else. In fact, numerous psychologists that have been doing this a lot longer are a lot more educated. Please go to them if you are looking for something formal. This is more for entertainment and for fun than this is about making sure that you all learn about mental health and psychology. So I guess I finally got the third reason, and it is because I want to be as real and authentic as possible. When I've listened to podcasts on my own, I've really appreciated the podcasters that are just authentic and messy and curse and say things wrong. By the way, I'm going to curse a lot, so if you're around kids or you're trying to play this in front of kids and you don't want them hearing F-bombs or other words, then I would just go ahead and either shut this off or shut their ears. But anyway, no, I'm really just trying to be real. In 2020, with everything going on, I am just really trying to get closer and closer to showing the world my authentic self. And that's not going to be pretty all the time, but I think by doing that, it will help everyone else to realize that their journey isn't pretty either. Spiritual awakening isn't pretty. It is not love and light. It is not, peace and butterflies. It is that at times, and it is also ugly and dirty as well. So there we go. Those are the reasons why I'm probably not going to be editing this at all. And if I do, it may just be down the road when I get better at this. So all right, let's get into it. I'm sure y'all are wondering, who am I? And maybe y'all don't care. Let's be real. You may not care. But let me just tell you a little bit about who I am and my journey in therapy and psychology. As a psychologist, not my own journey in my own therapy. We'll get to that probably at a different time. So in high school, actually in middle school and high school, I did not like school. Hated it. And the only classes that I actually liked in high school were my psychology class, which we had one, a sociology class, and my art class. I cracked open my first psychology book, and that was the only book I have ever written. Wow, see? There it is. It's the only book that I had read in high school that I wanted to read every single word, every single page. I was just fascinated by humans, how to understand them, how to understand the fucked up shit that I had seen and been part of, and that was part of the family and society and all this other stuff. And obviously sociology is very linked as well, but psychology was really my thing. And I also liked reading true crime novels on my own, and I could read them. Nobody had to ask me to do it. I just did it on my own. I guess it was like a little bit of a sick, twisted piece of me. I was fascinated by serial killers and mass murderers and spree killers, and I think it was John Douglas was the author that I read a lot in high school. I think he was the FBI guy. May have been the one that did Mindhunter. Anyway, so those two things were the only subjects in anywhere that actually fascinated me, that made me just want to do this on my own. And up until that point, I just thought I had no future. So I crack open this psychology book and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. Lucky for me, the high school that I went to had the senior year of your high school, you can spend the whole year, the first half, it was all about learning how to do interviews and resumes and cover letters and all that crap. And then the second half of the semester was all about going into different places and shadowing a person for a day or a couple hours to see what you thought. And on one of the times that I went for a shadow, I went to a prison and found out for the first time that there was such thing as a forensic psychologist. And I was like, wait, what? I could blend my fascination with serial killers and psychology. And that was when I realized at that moment, okay, I'm going to school. I'm going to be a psychologist. I'm going to be a forensic psychologist. So my very first year in undergrad, my first job ever, first paid job in the mental health field was working for a family that had an autistic child, and he was severely autistic. And so I would go into the home and teach him behavioral modification. I was waiting tables and saw one of my professors. Actually, I was hosting at the time. I was a hostess, and I saw one of my professors from undergrad who was a forensic psychologist. And I said to him, hey, if you ever need somebody to work for you, even volunteer work, like I don't even have to get paid, I don't care, but like you're a forensic psychologist, I would love to get the experience. And of course, like who wouldn't say yes to somebody just throwing themselves at him going, please, can I work for free? It was a great experience, and I am so fortunate that he probably did some things. He was a little in the gray area of what we're supposed to do as psychologists, but he gave me a lot of opportunities to get my feet wet as to what it meant to be a forensic psychologist. My main role as his volunteer was to help him research different cases that he was on for different murders in our area. So I did that for a little bit. So that's my undergraduate. I graduated with my bachelor's in psychology, and anyone that's out there in the mental health field, you will know that you can do jack shit with a bachelor's in psychology. So my very first job was, I think it was called something like mental health counselor or something like that. And pretty much I provided in-home services for children who were on like Medicaid or something to that effect. So the kids were on psychiatric medications, and the only way that the state would pay for those medications is to have a certain number of services from a counselor. And so that was my role. I had a caseload. I had to track people down in their homes to do several hours a week of therapy and services. Let me just tell you, after most families get the medication, they're like, yeah, I'm good, I got what I wanted. And they don't really want some young, 20-something-year-old, bright-eyed, oh, I can change the world kind of person coming into their home telling them what to do and how to do it. And so more times than not, the lights would all of a sudden shut off and when I pulled up, and they wouldn't make their appointments. And, it's hard to get people to change if they don't want to change. But this was a really good experience for me because I really, obviously, one of my first main jobs as in the mental health field, and I got to see all different socioeconomic statuses. I got to help those that didn't want to be helped, which made me, over time have to develop really good skills. And so I did that for a little bit. I went off for my master's degree, and during my master's degree, I did a couple of internships. One was a liaison in a jail for the mental health, which was cool. I got to help train some of the sheriffs in the area on what mental health was and how to respond to calls with clients or with the community that had mental health issues. So that was a really fun training to do, to act as if I was mentally ill and put the officers through a ringer. So maybe we'll go over that at some point. This is kind of an overview. So I did that, and that was really fun. And I graduated with my master's, and I was pretty burnt out on schooling because that's six years or so of schooling and waiting tables and not making any money. And I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm good. I'm stopping at my master's. And I went and worked for a psychiatric hospital, and I was an intake therapist. And so what that meant was I would either go into the emergency room that we were connected with, the mental health department within these hospitals, and we would either go into the emergency rooms to do our evaluations, or we had interview rooms in the actual mental health wing. And so sometimes the patients or potential patients would come to that building, and we would do an intake assessment. So ask them a whole bunch of questions. Why are you here? Determine the diagnosis as to what's going on. And then that was the fun part of the job. The not so fun part of the job was then calling insurances and trying to say why the insurance should pay for this decision for them to be inside the psychiatric hospital. Also, I had to work with psychiatrists, and some of them were great and wonderful and really valued our assessment and our opinion. We'd kind of have to pitch to them, this is the patient, this is what's going on. Some folks would be like, what do you think should happen? Do you think they should be hospitalized or not? Every decision had to be co-signed by a psychiatrist. And so some psychiatrists were great. Some psychiatrists talk to you like you're an idiot, and it was really tough to sort of develop that thick skin, which I sure as hell didn't at that time. Did not have a thick skin. I'm sure I cried numerous times after talking to some psychiatrists that totally questioned everything that I said and did, and why I would want to admit or not admit somebody to the psychiatric hospital. So the insurance part was not fun because often they would deny your claim or say that somebody shouldn't come in and they've already been admitted, and this is hours later or what have you. So that wasn't easy, but it was a very educational job, and I worked with some really amazing people that felt like family to me at that time. It was great. And after two years of that, making really low wages for master's level I wasn't a psychologist at that time, but a master's level person with a psychology degree. 2 years of that, I was like, there's not much movement up. I can't even get licensed with this degree. And I just said, all right, fuck it. I guess I'm going for my doctorate. And I looked for some programs, and there aren't a lot of forensic psychology PsyD programs out there in the United States. There are some for a PhD, but the difference between a PhD and a PsyD is that a PhD is more research-based, where a PsyD, P-S-Y-D, means that when you go for your doctorate, the focal point is how to then provide treatment as opposed to how to research and get all the statistics and analyses of different treatment modalities. The PsyD is more about how do I provide treatment. So that was more interest to me because I'm like, yeah, I could care less about researching it. I want to do it. So I went and got my doctorate in forensic psychology, which was great because every single class, regardless of, is a clinical forensic program, which means that the majority of the program is clinical based, but every single class has a forensic spin to it. So if we're talking about family dynamics with a spin of how could that look if you're dealing in the courts or families being, torn apart because of divorce or what have you. So it was very, very interesting. We learned about testing, everything. I enjoyed that and got a couple of internships, and one of my internships, this is the coolest coolest first experience of me providing therapy that kind of ties into how I became who I am. I was providing therapy for a woman with anxiety, and this was one of those moments where I would sit in the room with her and I would get these images in my head, like a visual, like not like a hallucination, but like, you know, when you're imagining something and you can hold that image in your head. And somehow, I don't know if it was intuition or some sort of psychic ability or what, but I was getting information about her that was beyond what she was saying in the room. And one time I decided to go with it. And I think I even prefaced it with, I have no idea where this is coming from, but here it is. What do you think? And it was spot on. And it got our work, and I think her trust and faith in me, to a whole different level. And I was like, whoa, that's cool. I had no idea what it was at the time. So granted, this is hindsight that I'm realizing, oh shit, that might have been intuition, or that might have been, you know, some sort of psychic moment where I was connecting in with her. So that was really cool. And she, to this day, is like one of my favorite people I've ever worked with, because we developed such a great bond through the therapy that we did. She made a lot of progress, and then the only reason it ended was because my internship was over. Then I did an internship with, my main internship was with survivors of sexual assault, rape, molestation, and I did that for a year. And here was another moment where I had some non-conventional things happen in and around therapy that, if I even told my therapist, which I've never, because I'm terrified to say something, probably the same reason you all are too, to say things to your mental health or medical professionals, but it's not conventional. And I don't think that if I took this anywhere but to people I felt safe with, that they wouldn't think that I was crazy. But there were days that I would be driving home from my internship, and the image or the thought to drive my car off the side of the road would pop up as I was driving home. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was only happening on one particular day out of the week. And it wasn't until my client said to me one day that she was actually having suicidal thoughts and hadn't been telling me for weeks on end, that I put two and two together and said, oh, wait, was I picking up on her suicidal thoughts? Because I was not suicidal. Like, it was weird to be thinking this or feeling this on my drive home once a week. And so I think that I was picking up on her suicidal thoughts that she was not conveying to me outwardly. And she, because of her suicidal thoughts, you know, I obviously had to, refer her out because I couldn't treat her. I mean, obviously she needed a higher level of care. And once that happened, they completely went away. I never thought about driving my car off the side of the road since then. And that was really weird. And I thought, okay, I'm going to put that one in the back of my hat so nobody else has to know about that. So internships done. We'll get into the in-betweens. But then my last job that I had before my current one, guys, stop. See, my dogs, they're trying to play, which is so cute, and I love it. Don't you just love when dogs play? But of course, they want to do it right now when mom's trying to focus on finishing up a quick podcast. And they're like, no, but mommy, it's playtime. So guys, promise, I'll play in a minute. So anyway, my last job, I worked for about 5.5 years at it's 2 different prisons that were both maximum security male inmates. And the first part, I was providing individual and group therapy to, it's kind of like the jail inside of a prison. So when guys are in prison and they continue to act out and do inappropriate things, they're put into this, it's segregation, so they're in there for a little bit of time, and so that's where I would provide the treatment. And then I became licensed, and shortly after being licensed, I was able to be the suicide prevention coordinator for the prison. And I did that for, I want to say, I think it was less than 6 months before I transferred to a different prison to then be the inpatient coordinator. So for guys that needed to be hospitalized in a state mental hospital, I would help to educate the staff on how to make the referral, how to complete the referral, who's appropriate for the referral, and then aid in the process of getting them referred, accepted, and moved. I did that for a while, and then luckily I got to transfer back into suicide prevention. Suicide prevention was a lot more fun. This sounds so horrible to say suicide prevention was fun, but I got to provide training to staff, a lot of training to staff, which I absolutely love training staff on tons of different topics. I found it a lot more clinically relevant to work on making sure policies and procedures were followed, that they were good policies and procedures to actually prevent inmates from taking their lives. And I was able to advocate for changes to happen locally, and help to evaluate suicide risk assessments, mentor other clinicians to improve their assessment of suicide risk and documentation of the suicide risk and all that. So I did that for a while, and then just recently I transitioned to a full-time private practice. I was doing private practice on the side as I was working in the prison, and circumstances changed, and I have been doing private practice exclusively, which has been amazing, and I absolutely love it. And so that is a little just brief sort of update or education or insight into just my overall training and my experience to sort of get me to this point. I'm going to go in a lot more depth as to how this all sort of plays out in the grand scheme of things. But I figured, my fiance said to me, well, you got to kind of explain to people how you have legitimacy. And I was like, yeah, that's fair enough. Why would anyone want to listen to this psychologist who, you don't know anything about? And this is our first conversation, and hopefully it entices you enough to keep wanting to listen. So next one, I'll probably do several episodes about my spiritual journey, because that one I think is a lot longer and probably a hell of a lot more interesting than you hearing about my resume, right? So I look forward to continuing on this journey, and just remember to take care of yourself and love yourself, because it is you ultimately who can make the changes. There's no therapist that can fix you. There is no person that can fix you. It is only you. So if you believe in yourself, we can all help you along the way. But if you believe in yourself, then you can be the change. Take care.